Let's go. I mean, we first got to meet each other, I think, backstage at, gosh, you fought Leo Glass in your debut, if I remember correctly. So that must have been about 2013.
2010.
2010.
11. Sorry, 11. I fought Leo in 2011.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I was looking back when I was doing a little bit of where we are. And I mean, you fought on some really big cards. I mean, obviously, you fought for the bantamweight title, which was against Zulu. Which was a big fight and a big coming. Talk us through a little bit about your early MMA days. I mean, 2010, 2008, and those sort of eras were the beginning of MMA.
So, I mean, I fell into MMA accidentally, and I don't know if many people know this story. So I was a retired professional boxer, working as a personal trainer. I was teaching some boxing at a small little gym in Ilovo, and the gym closed down on a Monday morning or on a Friday morning. I'm not 100% clear on the memory, but I remember coming into work in the morning and there were locks on the doors of our gym, and we got a message that the owners immigrated to Australia.
Oh, fantastic.
And we were without work, you know. So I actually asked my girlfriend at the time, now my ex-wife, to actually just like look on the internet. I was like, please find me, like, I need to find work. And she said, well, there's this gym called Fight Fit Militia in Sunninghill, which was kind of in the area that I was looking. And I walked into that gym the same day. I literally drove there, you know, not wanting to be without work and money. I walked into Fight Fit Militia and there was these guys, you know, it kind of looked familiar, you know, came from a combat background, but I was approached by one of these guys asking me, do I want to fight? And I was like, no, not at all. I'm actually looking for work. And this was Chef Norman Vessels. I said, I'm just looking for work. I've got some boxing experience. So he said, leave me your name and we'll get back to you. And I did so. I left my name, and I think Richie Kwan phoned me on the Monday. He said, listen, we did a bit of research and we'd like you to come teach our guys to box, and we'll obviously give you our space to use. We've got a professional fight team that we're busy building here. And I was like, yes, cool, there's work for me. Started teaching the guys at Fight Fit, you know, a little bit of boxing. I had an unbeaten pro record. I think that's what appealed to Richie and Chef. Then I ended up there, and I think we did an expo at one of the bodybuilders. I think it was the Jake Cutler Expo actually at Gallagher Estate, and we did a pad holding exhibition. And the next week, Cairo Howarth offered me an EFC contract, and that's literally how it started. That's literally how I got into MMA, and the fight that I was offered was a main card fight with Leo Glass, after not ever having been in an MMA fight, amateur or otherwise. So that was quite a interesting landing into the MMA world, but very exciting. I mean, life-changing. The people I met. It was absolutely incredible. It was absolutely incredible. I mean, you know that world. It's a very complex and interesting place to be involved in.
So, and it is. I mean, to your point, Charlie, it's a very complex place to be. A lot of egos you need to manage, and a lot of champions that are out there that have done incredible things without telling anyone or without showing anyone. But you know, coming into that scene, fighting Leo Glass was a big fight. But you know, there's a couple of cards. I don't know if it pulls out. And I mean, we were on at World of Warriors. We were on similar cards. We were on the same. We were on almost all the cards. But I picked up two cards that actually three cards in your fighting career that were massive. historical cards, and I mean the one was the where you fought obviously for the bantamweight title fight, which is an amazing fight with Zulu, and amazing build up. And in those days, it was exciting stuff. It was Twitter was rampant. Smack talk was all over the place. We were, everything was built up. But I'm not sure if you remember on that fight, on that EFC 27, there were a couple of historical moments. Two of them I think are great.
I do remember that. Wow.
Yeah, one of them obviously was Butu was the night he died. Which was for the industry, but I don't want to dwell on the negative in the sport, obviously. For me, two fights on that night was Drickus defeated Donovan Hawkey, which was sort of in my mind, and we were actually preparing Donovan for that fight because we worked with a lot of the Durban guys, and for me it was a changing of guard that night. Drickus, obviously, he's doing really well in the UFC and that now, but it was a changing of guard because Donovan Hawkey was bam bam, you know what I mean? Donovan was Donovan. He was a tough motherfucker, and he would beat most people. So the other big one that I picked out of there, and it's hilarious because, I mean, you remember old Tumela Maputo?
Yeah.
Okay, big hands, big leg kicks. And why I picked this one out, because it's hilarious, because he beat Fraser Opie from the UK by submission. And I don't think Tumela Maputo's ever won a fight by submission, but on that night that you fought for the bantamweight title fight, it was quite a historical fight. Do you remember that night at all?
I do. Grant, I've got so many memories about that night, so vivid. The first thing I recall, like obviously it was the biggest fight of my life, fighting for the EFC bantamweight title. It was the first ever bantamweight title. And I remember being on my way to the change rooms, and also, just to recap, but not to dwell on anything, my conditioning coach came running at me. He said, Buto just died in the cage, and that, what that did to my central nervous system at the time, the shock that I went through, I mean, I was a father at the time, a new father. I had these thoughts like, I'm going to get in that cage in about 45 minutes time, where a guy just died, in probably one of the most lethal sports in the world. And that, not to say that it had an effect on the fight, but I mean, that's quite obvious, but that changed my life. That moment was, I think, the tipping point for me and the start of my exit of professional fighting. I've never had the opportunity to ever share this, but that incident, created a big shift in my life. Definitely I'd say for the better. I didn't realize it at the time. At the time, you just want to win. If you're a fighter, there's only one thing on your mind. You want to be the champion. That night, it didn't happen. Zulu boy, he got the better of me. He landed on my back, and he landed some elbows and some crazy shots. And
but he was an insane athlete. I mean, Zulu boy was crazy. Yeah. I remember in pro trials, he hit Bibi with a flying knee, and his nose was literally against his face. I had to straighten it for him so he could finish the third round of his pro trials. I mean, Zulu was because he's still around. He was a crazy
phenomenal.
Athlete. Yeah.
Phenomenal. I mean, I remember what he did with Craig Nino's nose at the final seconds of their fight. Touch wood that I came out of that fight, unhurt.
Still looking silky smooth, Charlie?
That's like one of the things that I cherish. Like, I didn't take a lot of punishment during a pro boxing and a MMA career. But yeah, that was a big night. I don't remember Tumelo's fight. I didn't watch it because I was backstage. But yes, Drickus. I mean, Drickus is a gentleman. He's a little bit north from where I live, and he's created like momentum now. People are taking note of him because he got a big bonus in the last UFC as well.
Real money.
I mean,
doing really well.
He's doing really, really well for himself. I mean, yeah, those were exciting days. As you mentioned, Grant, there were a lot of like egos to manage. And speaking for myself, that was also one of the egos that I needed to manage, because it was fame and fortune. And that fight, I remember the Super Sport crew, the Super Sport TV crew coming to my house, interviewing me and my wife, and it was televised all over the world. So it was like an incredible amount of attention to deal with, and this is all in hindsight. Back then it was just like, this is what it is. It's exciting. But now when you mention it, like, and I think back on it, it was so much attention to deal with, so yeah, what a ride.
Yeah, it's
What
crazy.
a ride.
When I think about that, and I have given that night, funny enough, a lot of thought. And that's what's really amazing for me in my belief system, that you and I are kicking the series off, because that night on what you fought changed my life within MMA. And I went on a mission to make sure that in my mind at least, and it might not have always played out, that we made the sport as safe as possible for athletes. And at Fight Stars, we were able to introduce things like medical aid for the athletes and fight insurance and things like that, as did the EFC and things like that, and really try and take that away. And when I think about you, and you just mentioned it now, you don't realize now, I mean, until now, when you look back at it and you start unpacking it, what a huge impact that had on different history. I mean, we were part of history in MMA, and I mean, I've always wanted to do a documentary on South African MMA, but I'm not sure that there's enough stuff to go around to keep all these egos in check, because there's a lot of egos in that business to manage. But it is what it is. So the other big night that I really, really loved, and you were on that card, and it was actually, funny enough, your last night that you fought. And it was a massive fight as well. And I think you broke your hand in that fight, if I remember correctly. It was down in Cape Town. The main card was Boyd and Don Madge, which was...
Boyd and Don Madge,
was such a super hyped fight, and was like the first super fight South Africa had ever seen. And then I don't know if you remember what happened, because you were obviously involved in your own massive fights, things like that. But they declared it a draw, which almost killed the whole.
I remember that.
Like that.
Yes,
it's crazy.
Even me,
Even me. Syed who was the Cape Town local fighter on that night as well. We were there with Gordon Rittman. He took more shots to the groin than I've ever seen in my life from, I think it was Bruno. And
I remember that night.
Same night. And that was the same night that David Bursky beat Marcel Tennis by elbows, and they told us that it was part of their strategy to wear him out. And it was a crazy, crazy night in Cape Town. Do you remember that night? I mean, that was your last night, eh, Charlie?
Rod, that was my last night, and also I have so many memories about that night. I mean, the medics wanted to send me to hospital for an emergency op on my hand.
Remember.
And I refused, because I wanted to go and party with all my sponsors and friends at the after party. But coming back to that fight, I think Irshad, before he joined the EFC, he was the world bantamweight champion in the one FC or one MMA. It was I think it was a Asian organization where he was the world bantamweight champion. And I was incredibly honored to be offered that fight, and I actually thought that I did quite well until my hand snapped and I lost focus for a split second, went to the ground, which obviously wasn't my strongest point. Everyone knows that. But yes, that was a big night. Hey? I remember Don's fight with Boyd. It was an incredible fight. I mean, those two just left it all out there. The striking was incredible. And even though the draw was the most disappointing thing that could ever happen, I couldn't pick a winner. I honestly, I couldn't pick a winner. But in saying all of this, that was the night that officially ended my MMA career. That hand injury, I wouldn't call it a career-ending injury, But during that time was when I actually had a spiritual awakening, and very, very soon after that, I actually phoned Graham Cartmel, the matchmaker, and I said to him, Graham, I'm done. And he actually laughed at me. He said, like, no, you'll be back. They always come back, and I said to him, no, I'm actually done. I'm actually done, because I knew, I was convinced. When I knew, I knew.
So talk us through that, Charlie. I mean, you're fighting in the biggest card in Africa at that present time. You're on. I mean, that Cape Town card was what I would say 10,000 people in that stadium. I remember that night so well.
Yeah.
Packed.
Yeah.
I mean, those Cape Town crowds were insane. They were. I mean, okay, you were fighting a local boy who had travelled and come back to South Africa, but he had a big fan fight. It's such a. I mean, I remember being in the change rooms and background, warming up athletes, watching. Just, it's such a ride of emotion before those evenings and that. Like, when did you actually just stop and realize that I don't want this anymore?
So, Grant, like I mentioned, when in the Zulu Boy fight, or the night when I fought for the title, when sadly that Buto passed away, that I think was when the seed was planted, when I realized that, or when I started asking the question, do I want to continue risking my life? For what? Actually, that was the question. For what am I risking? Because you are risking your life. When you get into that cage, every single time you're risking your life. And I think I started asking the question, like, is this worth it? Is this still in alignment with my values? As now a father with more responsibilities. And when I broke my hand that night when I was fighting Irshad, that actually led, like I said, I didn't go for the hand up that night. I went partying with the guys of Super Dry and all of that. And when I got back into Joburg, like, my hand was like a soccer ball. And I was seeing this guy. He was like an alchemist. He sold me herbal supplements that I used to cut weight actually for my fights, But he was this Indian guy. He was actually a mystic, and he was a healer. And I wasn't into all the woo-woo stuff, but I've always felt drawn to this guy. And I went to go see him, and there was a synchronicity of events that led to me ending up on this weekend. It was a spiritual retreat. It was called the Vision Quest, where I actually took a brew called ayahuasca. And after drinking that, during this whole weekend, I had a full-on spiritual awakening. I experienced so much healing and forgiveness, and I saw so much of the darkness and the violence that was integrated into my body through all the fighting and years of fighting, and even beyond that, stuff that I never even realized through my childhood, and why I ended up fighting, as a way to express this violence that was in me in a safe way, or a legal way, So I had such a moment of self-realization and awakening, and realized that I actually had belief systems within me that I had to fight to get what I want in life. There was this belief system that you have to fight and you have to go through pain to get things, and I realized so many things, and that was when I realized, like, I'll never fight again, I'll never fight again, physically or professionally for that matter. And that next day, like, when I was finished on that weekend retreat, I phoned Graham. I think it was on a Sunday, and I said to him, Graham, I'm done. I'm retiring. You can take me off your roster. And he laughed. Yeah, he laughed at me. He said, no, man, you'll be back. They always come back. And I was like, done. And that led to a whole path that I'm still on, in terms of just fulfilling my purpose, which I believe is to help people to realize who they are, how powerful they are, and how beautiful they really are.
That's awesome. I love that. I love that. I really do. And again, I think because part of my path is to help people realize how amazing they are and what they can actually achieve. So it's so awesome. You say when you went and you realize, and again, I think it's key that we when we look inside as fighters or as warriors, that over the years and years of life and history and everywhere we've gone, in order to become the best, we've always sort of had to fight for it. And I'm talking as human nature, in order to, and you probably go all the way back, although I don't have any books that go back, but to cavemen, they probably smashed each other to get the best cave. And I mean, the best woman and the best mating partner, things like that. So, do you think that violence is in us?
Grant, well, yes, 100%. I do believe that violence is in us. It's in our DNA, in a very deep level, purely because of, like, when humans, like you said, when we were cavemen, in the early days, that was, we had to fight, we had to kill things, to survive. We had to fight for the best woman or the best cave, or even for food when there was scarcity. But what I do 100% believe, and I'm convinced of this, is obviously times have changed. We don't have to fight for food anymore, because food's so freely available. We don't have to fight to live in a home because, there's homes, and times have changed. So we are evolving as human beings, so those belief systems and values that used to serve us in the past, and I'm not talking millions of years ago, I'm talking a few years ago, a couple of years ago, is not serving us anymore, or personally, yes, but I think collectively as well. I think violence is senseless. At this point, we are so technologically advanced, and I think it's time that we start matching that level of technological advancement with our intellect and our emotion as well, and get our shit together and realize we can all live together and thrive.
Wouldn't that be great if we could actually realize that? And I mean, a lot of it in the violence now, when I talk to certain people, they talk about educated violence, cage fighting or MMA, it was always looked as educated violence. But I mean, again, when we started getting involved in that sports, there wasn't too much educated about it, in my opinion. Again, Charlie, you were a great boxer, and you've got the most amazing hands, but not too much educated about getting in a cage and standing toe to toe with Zulu Boy and trying to knock his head off. You know what I mean? But what I do see, and I do believe with you, that we are evolving, and technology is changing the way that we do everything. And if I look at the workplace at the moment, which is obviously where we both sit now, MMA warriors, in a workplace, you're looking where everyone's going, how do we work better, and how do we do better? How do we get people to achieve better things?
Yes.
Clearly, in an office environment, is not going to be through violence. But how much of that ambition to be a champion do you think still revolves in the workplace? And how do you tell your clients and things like that what to control that ego? Because I relate that stupid, crazy violence, if you want, to ego. For me, it's greed. Ego. It's the worst words in the world. And I had huge ego issues, but luckily for me, I've accepted that.
Yeah, Grant, so first of all, I don't think there's anything negative about the ego itself, because the ego is basically our identity, of which there can be negative aspects, like when you talk about the greed and that willingness to dominate and be a champion, be better than others. I think when you start to, integrate that and learn from that, and, just have that shift of what drives you, when you kind of like find a purpose, which obviously purpose is what fulfills us. And if you can have a purpose that serves others and be fulfilled by that I think for me was the biggest shift, finding fulfillment in helping others through educating them and work through their subconscious belief system and rearranging their values so that they can transform and live a more harmonious life. But coming back to your question, in the office space or the corporate space or the workspace, in relation to, being a warrior, having that background, I think it can be such a useful thing. In my case, I've had to ask a lot of questions, a lot of difficult questions, about, my past, and, do I just discard it? Do I just let go of that? And I realized that our egos, it's not something that we not even need to transcend or get rid of, but needs to be integrated. We can't get rid of our past, but we can learn from it and improve upon that. So I looked at myself, as this former athlete, besides all the violence, there were so many great things that we learned from it. I mean, the discipline. I mean, you as a communicator, you had one of the biggest, if not the biggest, amateur promotion in the country. Fight Stars was absolutely phenomenal. I was a huge fan. It was, that ability to hold that space, to hold so many people and motivate people and organize things. And from an athlete's perspective, that the discipline and the focus, to show up, when things weren't easy, or to the least bit comfortable. We experienced insane amounts of pain, which to me was normal. As an athlete, pain is normal. But nowadays, in this, when you make that shift into a more corporate or friendly environment, when you don't have to beat someone up to earn a paycheck, I think there's a lot of virtues that can be integrated into that space, because I believe, in our evolution, when we want to grow, whether it be business or personal or in our relationships, I believe that being uncomfortable is essential, So having, in a very early stage of our lives, become very acquainted with discomfort, I think it's served me, and I'm sure it served you in many ways, in what you're now doing, in terms of educating people or inspiring people. And yeah, for me, it's like, I like to stay uncomfortable. There are moments where I get really comfortable in my business and with the clients I work with. Then I know it's time to step it up and to create a bit of a shift. So I'm so grateful, Grant. I'm so grateful for having been in that experience of the EFC and MMA and, the educated violence, not that I agree with it anymore. I see there is massive benefit and massive value there if you can look at it from a higher perspective.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, again, for me, I would advise everybody to train in a mixed martial art.
Yeah.
And for me, your values, your belief, your discipline, and I took out of the absolute discipline that I learned from athletes. And I was lucky enough that I was able to share that experience with my family and have my kids grow up in that same environment where they were training with people that wanted to be the best in the world, and they were watching how hard it was and how every day. I mean, at World of Warriors, I used to arrive at the gym at 5 o'clock in the morning. We used to open the gym. We used to train for 2 hours. We used to all go to work, and we used to meet back at the gym at 5 o'clock. And it was really fantastic to see how everyone with a full-time job would come back and dedicate those 5 hours a day to becoming the best that they could come. And, one thing I always loved about, not everyone, but a lot of the guys would come in and go, I don't think I'll ever be a champion, but I want to be the best that I could be. And I used to say,
yeah,
doesn't mean you can't be a champion, but to train that level every single day and to go, for me, the discipline of standing in front of someone as a trainer and knowing their ideas and their beliefs and what they want to do, their goals, and pushing them harder and harder, because that's all it really is, isn't it? As a personal trainer, you're just pushing people to achieve their goals. Was amazing, and you could see you learned a lot about. I learned a lot about people in those days. I learned a lot about their breaking points. I learned a lot about how they react and where they are and their beliefs in that. But I do believe, to your point earlier with regards to values and beliefs, I got a lot of my core understanding from being involved in mixed martial arts and dealing with just everyone across the board, from the athletes to the promoters to the associations to the fans and I always used to, and I still do. I mean, I always say to people, I'm just a super fan. I just love the sport at the end of the day. I mean, everyone used to say, I don't know how you put on such good fights. And I was like, well, I just wanted to see who would win. Like, I thought it would be a good fight. And I really just wanted to see who would win. And a lot of the guys would just, Fight Star had that reputation. And I don't know if you remember, we had that small cage where there was nowhere to hide. You couldn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
Basically stood toe to toe and smashed. And people used to come. I still remember Quibus. I think his name was Quibus. I can't remember his surname. Quibus Darth.
I remember him.
He dislocated his arm in an armbar at Fight Star 4 at Mandeville's, and he came to me with his arm hanging and went, I'm really sorry, Coach Grant. Can I have a go at the next Fight Star, please? And I was like, bud, can you just go and fix your arm first? But that passion to achieve was amazing for me. And that's what I saw in everyone's eyes when we used to go into those big arenas, that fear, but that passion to achieve. And that's what drove me with top athletes. And the other thing, sorry, I wanted to just point on that you said there as well, was the ability to be in an uncomfortable situation. You have no idea how much that's helped me in life. When I think of the uncomfortable situations, and sometimes I put myself in, and sometimes other people put me in, that I had to deal with in this journey. And that for me, those two things, understanding my values and belief and understanding that a difficult situation is actually just a door that we need to decide whether we want to open it or we want to move on. And that for me, that uncomfortableness is key.
Yes, I faced a lot of uncomfortable situations since the Warrior days, so to speak. And I think without having gone through all of that, it would have been so much more difficult, now I face something, that's that a lot of people seem concerned about. They'll ask me, are you okay? Do you need assistance? And then I just think of being smashed, by giants twice my size at 5 Foot Militia, on a Saturday morning for 2 hours. And then I realized, no, man, I've got this. This is a piece of cake. Life is a song. It's insane, like the gratitude that I have for what I've been through. And I still have injuries, from not from fights, from training at FFM. The training we went through there was, in hindsight, I think it was a bit excessive, but 6 hours a day of extreme conditioning. On a Tuesday or a Wednesday, we had Sundays off. So by Tuesday or a Wednesday, some days I wouldn't know if I was dreaming or sleeping. That's because I had a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old son at that time, and I wasn't sleeping, and I was training 6 hours a day and training clients in between that. And going through that, it was such a preparation, and as hard as it was probably one of the biggest gifts I could have had as a tool for life.
when you were going through that training, and I mean, it's like literally, as you say, wake up Monday morning, 5 o'clock, get your ass to the gym.
Yeah.
It's an uncomfortable situation for most people, let's be honest. Like, again, I remember training with getting Bruno, not Bruno, old the Black Panther, Makisi, ready for the Dani fight. Bernardo. And we had no big guys at the gym. David had just fought and he was off, and it was Lennon threw me in with Bernardo in fight prep. And I remember getting into the car and just like crying a little bit while I drove home because my body was so sore, and trying to get out the bed. And on the next morning, my wife laughing at me and going like what are you trying to prove to everyone? My point is that I think that was an uncomfortable situation that we just got comfortable with, and it became an everyday norm. And that for me, scary when I look back, and when you look back at how hard you trained in order to achieve this and what you pushed your body through, your eating. And I mean, I was never the weight doctor. You know, we had Rory who used to cut these oaks. I was just used to laugh. And being a fatty myself, I was like, oh, Rory, please, can you just like give me a pill that I could lose this weight? So I think Gordon Rittman used to ask that as well, to be honest. He used to but that sort of prep and training and day-to-day life for however long we did it and however long people do it almost numbs you to the norm and makes you look at things differently.
For me, normal was soft back then, you know. Like in hindsight, like I look at that now, I've got no desire to put myself through anything that intense, you know. It was tough. Like, I mean, Fightfit was well known for like the insanity of what they trained. You know, we started with 5 a.m. CrossFit, 6 a.m. wrestling, 7 a.m. technical striking. Then at 12 o'clock, we do jits for 2 hours. And in the evening, we do pads for 2 hours. You know, so that's like 7-8 hours of intense training. You know, that was for the full-time fighters, you know, which I was for about 4 years. And I've got no desire to go through that again, but I took so much from that. Like, I took so much from that. I feel like I can handle anything, honestly, Grant. I mean, I've got associates and people that I train. I train a lot of CEOs of businesses and leaders, and you know, that resilience, you know, my ability to articulate that has been a great gift, and it's allowed a lot of people that I work with to understand how tough and how challenging things really can get, you know, and through understanding the values and bridging that gap, you know, into a corporate environment, you know, I think that's a beautiful, beautiful place for me to be.
100%. I mean, I'm going to jump right into where you are at the moment. And when I go through and I read up about you, and you talk about passion frequency and having fun and joy, and I'm like, you're freaking kidding me, because you're hitting everything that I'm like passion for me. And I mean, again, where I work now, we work with, I don't know, 50 odd of the most amazing, intelligent, crazy academics that are just destroying everything and absolutely flying in what they're doing in that. And I talk to them and they look at me like, passion? What the hell? Like, how do you find passion in this? And it's like, but they're passionate about what they do. You know what I mean? We've got a guy that's got a PhD in machine learning. Like, you have to be passionate, because when I hear how hard these guys have had to work to get all these academics and all this sort of thing together, I feel they've been uncomfortable places as well. But talk us through your passion frequency.
I will, Grant, thanks. And I'd love to hear more about what you're involved with, because we touched on it briefly, but, you know, I don't know if you want to get into it while we're chatting here or afterwards, but like, I'd love to hear more. So, I mean, passion frequency, that was one of the concepts that it just came up, that I don't think I've ever heard that statement or those words joined together like that. So just a little bit of background, before I actually like share how that came about, was in that vision quest I spoke about earlier, when I ended up and I drank this thing called ayahuasca. Ayahuasca it's a psychedelic. It's one of the strongest psychedelics on the planet, and it's basically a South American tradition. That these people in the jungle, they brew this medicine to enhance or to establish or bring about that connection with God or with nature, whatever it is, your belief systems are in alignment with. It's all the same thing. But that um, like put me on a path of studying metaphysics, things like mindfulness and meditation and yoga and shamanism, and I actually apprenticed with some guys, learning how to work with these plant medicines, and I've actually facilitated lots of transformational work since 2015. Since I started apprenticing under that and working with these natural medicines, then led me onto a path of actually wanting to know more about the human psyche and human behavior, because these things worked. These medicines that we worked with were incredibly effective. Like, I mean, it shifted my reality in such powerful ways, and I started working with it, and people also started experiencing massive transformations. But I wanted to know why. What happens in the mind, for an individual's reality to just change for the better. So I started studying formally neuro-linguistic programming, which is basically the science of shifting belief systems and values in a way that brings about transformation. And in neuro-linguistic programming, we learned a lot about, the different parts of the brain and how our feelings, basically create what we experience. So whatever thoughts and feelings we have in the present moment determines our future, because our thoughts and our feelings determines our behaviors. So I started learning about state control, and I started also learning that feelings are actually vibrations. It's actually a movement in the body. Now going into neuroscience and into physics, whenever you put something on a microscope, even if it looks solid, it moves. Like the whole universe is turning and moving. There's moving parts. So these feelings are actually frequencies in the body, right? Joy, sadness, anger, all of these states, these mental states actually have a physical vibration to it. Now, having been a scholar for a little bit, an amateur scholar, I'd say, studying different religions and bringing that together with all the sciences. A lot of these teachings talk about playfulness. The Hindus or Sadhguru, if you look at these guys, they speak about joy, the state of joy being the primary catalyst for living in a harmonious life. And on the Christian side, I grew up, in a very Christian household, and there was a saying that unless you become as little children, will you access the kingdom of heaven. So having expanded, all these studies, I started realizing the truth in all these mystics and all these ancient teachings, that all of these states, they speak of heaven and nirvana. These are actual, according to me, just how I make sense of things, to be actual physical state, and our physical state, like I said, determines our thoughts, our behaviors, and in effect, our results. So accessing that state for me of passion, which is a feeling, but it's also a frequency. Whenever I do something from a place of curiosity, playfulness, and excitement, that to me is passion frequency, because you're interested in something, but you're not burdened by it. For me, if I speak to my clients, they're like, let's get serious about this. Then I said, well, let's rather get playful about it. Because if you look at someone's face when they're serious, there's a contraction. You see a contraction, and what happens when the system contracts? It blocks the flow of energy. So when you're curious, you're open. When you're having fun, when you're playful, you're more open. So there's a more flow of energy. So you can process information. You can think and free your thoughts that are in higher alignment or greater alignment with whatever it is you want to achieve. So that was kind of where the concept passion frequency comes from. It's accessing that state, of attention without being serious, rather being playful and curious. So yeah, basically, I don't know if I babbled now or if it made any sense.
I love it because it's great. Because the other way you look at it, and it's something that I'm actually doing quite a lot of work on and trying to understand is fear, which is the opposite to what you're talking about. So again, and I believe your point earlier, and that's why I smile, because it's nice to get the reassurance, but. Yeah. We are so nervous of being in an uncomfortable situation. We've got so many fears that have been brought into the way that we brought up, and how we handle those uncomfortable situations has been imprinted, and it's breaking those systems and breaking those belief patterns that's so critical in order for us to become the best we can become. And until you face that, until you face that, you're pretty much not going to get any. I don't want to say get anywhere, because people do, but you're pretty not going to find that frequency of joy. And I honestly believe, I honestly 110% believe that if you're passionate and happy, and passion and happy and joy, and that for me is everything. If you can get that right, you can achieve amazing things. And it. Again, on the other hand, if you're not, and if you're scared, and if you're negative about it and everything like that, you're going to achieve fuck all, because your body's going to shut you down.
100%. 100%, Grant. Yeah. It's obviously, having learned quite a lot about the mind and our unconscious belief systems and values, a lot of that stuff comes from childhood. The things that we believe. I mean, between the ages of when we're born and until we reach about the age of 7 years old, we're walking around in a state of hypnosis. The brain is in a theta brainwave state. And as children, we just absorb, everything as truth, because that is how we download the program so that we can function in this world. The thing is, we take on the beliefs of our parents, of schools, on stuff we see on TV, which aren't necessarily positive and empowering things. A lot of these belief systems limit us. It allows us to form these beliefs about what we're worth and what we're capable of, and that can be very limiting. It can create a belief that I have to fight extremely hard for what I want, for instance, coming back to that fighting mentality. And this is one of the things that I see in executives and people that I work with. They reach these ceilings, for instance, in let's say the income or the impact that they're able to have through their business. And when we do a little bit of the work, it comes down to a belief system about what they're worth. Some of these guys, they don't even know it, but when we look at their values and the beliefs in a very deep way, there are these beliefs and this little voice in their head that comes from childhood that says, you're not worthy of love or abundance and all these things. And in what I call identity design, we literally go and look at all those things and we ask the question, what would I like to believe instead? And then we shift those belief systems, we shift those values, and the transformation and the results from simple unconscious shifts is incredible. That's why I'm so excited about the work that I do. And it's so because there's an actual recipe for changing beliefs, changing values, and actually creating a more limitless way of showing up in the world, without all those old stories that we are led to believe.
I love that, limitless. I love that, because again, and I look at it as well, and like I said earlier, I work with a lot of young academics that are coming through that are doing crazy stuff, like I said, insane stuff. But a lot of them have limited beliefs. They
Yes.
They have fears, which I suppose is normal for a 30-year-old person coming out into the real world.
Yes.
Those beliefs are, and I mean, and I'm thinking out loud here, but as well, like as a parent, you sort of shudder to go, yo, I wonder how badly I screwed my kid up.
Yes.
But
Yes,
at least we've worked out how to fix it now. Hopefully, if they'll listen to us now that they're in their teenagers and things like that. So,
yeah.
I suppose my question to you, or my next sort of question to you is: you deal with a lot of leaders in business. You deal with a lot of leaders are only figuring this shit out now. So,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
how do you think we get to this? Everything's changing, work's changing, people are changing the way they work and all that sort of thing. People have to, in my mind, start becoming more accountable for the actions that they do in a workplace, and they can get rewarded. How are you addressing leaders that are just like lost? That's your program you work with. You literally put them on a program and start unpacking?
Yes. So, Grant, yeah, thank you for that question. It's a beautiful one, and I'm excited to answer that. Just coming back to what you said before, like when you said, wonder like how much have I screwed up my kids? Because I've had that thought many times. But the one thing that I'd like to just share with you is that all the traumas that we go through as children, right? Including myself growing up in an extremely violent household and neighborhood and all of these things, like looking at all of that and having seen this higher perspective, from just expanding my consciousness over the years, I've realized that those things and those wounds, that we experience as children are actually very sacred gifts because they put us on this journey, so that we can go through certain things. And what I've realized is those traumas, that we experience become our gift, our greatest gift. They become the driving force about why we do what we do in terms of how we serve other people. So just touching on that, like I think we all screw our kids up in some way or another, or we all instill some sort of trauma. Even if we give them the best life, we might give them so much comfort that they find it hard. Exactly. So I don't think we can get around that, but I think whatever happens, whatever it is we do is perfect and it's sacred, because that's going to give them exactly what they need to be who they need to be in the future.
Love it.
So just like I just had to put that out there. And then coming back to your last question about, things are changing, but there are still a fair amount of leaders that are lost in terms of, these people who know how to make money like you cannot believe, but they're not necessarily happy. I mean, there are people whose lives are completely screwed up with all the money in the world, right? Like relationships are falling apart, and all our relationships, with our staff, with our spouses, our kids, those relationships are all based on the relationship with ourselves, and with what it is we identify, I feel, as a higher power, because when that relationship is in turmoil, it reflects externally. Everything we experience in our reality is based on our identity, which is our set of perceptual filters. Like, I mean, we can both look at one scenario, but I might be shit scared of it, and you might look at it as like, oh, well, look, what a wonderful opportunity. Now that comes from our perceptual filters, that part of our identity that is obviously formed by belief systems. But this is where I like when I work with these leaders, who like are really just looking at their relationships from this difficult lens You know, when we do state shifts, you know, and it's all about the state. You know, if I'm in the state and I look at it and I'm scared, and you see an opportunity, you look at it with curiosity, where I look at it from a place of resistance and fear and all of these. And these are belief systems, and they're filters, and they can be changed. So I think when it comes to leaders, you know, and especially now with technology connecting everyone, you know, everything these days is connected, from, I mean, from cities to ports, and, you know, people, we're so connected technologically, but we're so disconnected within ourselves. You know, we're disconnected from our beliefs and our values. So Carl Jung said it beautifully. He said, unless we make the unconscious conscious, it will control our lives, and we call it fate. And I think what's happening in this world collectively, even though things may seem really, really crazy, I think a lot of things are coming to the surface, you know, collectively, because whatever happens internally, you know, has to be realized externally. So I think a lot of people are becoming aware of their own bullshit, right? To put it very plainly. But this is a beautiful thing. You know, people are seeing all this turmoil and all the, I call it a raging storm of change. That's what we're in. We're in this raging storm of change. And I believe instead of trying to predict the future, it's time to take responsibility and start to create the future instead of trying to predict it.